Coming up today on Locked On Texas Tech, has anyone been eliminated from the Red Raider big board? Has any progress been made? And what rumor possibly had legs? Next on Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We're going to start this thing off right. Raider! Everything runs through Lubbock.
Great to be with you again on Locked On Texas Tech on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for making us your first listen each weekday on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts with the only Chris Level. I'm Casey Cowan coming to you on a Monday afternoon on the road. I'll say level, maybe parts unknown myself. Parts known to myself, but not known to others. So chop that up, make it make sense. But Chris, a few hours have evaporated on Monday. We've seen some seasons obviously come to an end as the first weekend of the NCAA tournament is now in the books. So we're just hitting the hot sheet once again and catching up on where we are. And I don't know necessarily that there's any reason to expect just a boatload of clarity now that you might not have had going into the weekend, but where do we sit as some timelines have freed up for some head coaches here or there? And, of course, Texas Tech still feels that pressing sense of urgency to get something done as soon as is reasonable, I guess.
Yeah, Cowan, I think you're getting closer. That is my sneaking suspicion here. I don't know if you have a favorite yet, but I do think you're able to kind of eliminate some candidates and kind of hone in a bit. I do still think that talks have probably even happened today with one or more candidates. I think it's important for you to know, like as you did, that some of these guys that we have been talking about. Paul Mills, for example, at Oral Roberts, their season is over with. Randy Bennett. I keep doing that. That's the second time I've done that with you. Randy Bennett's season at St. Mary's is over with. Andy Kennedy, how about we'll do that? That's the correct name. His season, I think, is still ongoing. They play in the NIT on Wednesday, as does Grant McCaslin. He plays on Tuesday, so that would be tomorrow night. And so their seasons could – and if they win, if either one of those programs win those games, they're going to be playing well into next week, which those games are in Las Vegas. They will have reached the NIT semifinals and those kinds of things. So just make note of that. Now, if one or both of those guys are remaining – candidates, and I do think that at least Grant McCaslin is, but I'm not going to be surprised if Andy Kennedy is more involved than we kind of think too. The UAB head coach, former coach at Ole Miss, I think that you could easily visit with them, get something done, all those things, after their games this week, even if they do win them, and maybe just the public doesn't become aware of it until whenever it is would be deemed appropriate. But as far as Bennett, as far as Mills, as far as the Steve Alfords, obviously, and Rick Pitino is a name that got brought up initially. He has inked a 6-year deal with St. John's. Nobody is shocked with that news. He was never really involved here, I don't think. I think he was always, pointed toward the St. John's job. Ed Cooley has left Providence for Georgetown, so now Providence is open. None of that really should affect you at all. Wichita State is open, and it's widely thought that Chris Jans of Mississippi State, their season is over. He coached there before, that I think he's going to have some level of interest in that job, or they'll have a level of interest in him. And then there's the wild card of James Borrego, the former NBA head coach that coached the Charlotte Hornets and was a part of the Orlando Magic and San Antonio Spurs organizations, is available to kind of talk to you and all those things. So that's kind of the list that I would be aware of that, either Tech is or these candidates are interested in, that you would think there's some mutual interest in several of these guys. But is there somebody else that we're not aware of that we haven't brought to light yet? Good question. And I wouldn't rule that out either. But that's kind of where things stand. So with that, I'll turn it over to you and ask you what direction you want to go from that.
Well, I'm just wondering to a certain degree, and it may be still too early in the process to even ask this question, but I'm curious timeline-wise, do you think there's been anybody that Texas Tech has truly explored that now is down the road in the sense that either they've passed or this guy's gone somewhere else? Because, like the Patino stuff and some stuff in that category, I don't know what that was. I don't know that there was like some exploration and then either party moved on. I don't know if that ever even actually happened or it's just like tweets that are out there in the ether. But do you know of anybody that Texas Tech has really taken a hard look at and either crossed them on the list by their own decision or by the fact that this guy has taken a job somewhere else? Mike Bray is an example. I just pulled that totally out of thin air, but the former ND coach, now a USF coach all of a sudden. Anybody you think that maybe fits that bill?
And if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying, is there anybody they looked at that they are no longer looking at? Is that
just like, have we actually made any progress, or have we still just kind of been in a holding pattern waiting for some seasons maybe to come to an end?
I think you're still somewhat in that process. I think I'd be willing to bet, though, as today has gone along, I'd be willing to bet they're getting much, much closer to what you're suggesting. Okay. and kind of honing in. Look, I don't pretend to know everything that's gone on here. I talk to plenty of people call me and just offer things up. I haven't heard near as much about the Chris Jans or the Paul Mills as much as I've heard about Grant McCaslin, about Randy Bennett, and about possibly James Borrego. But that doesn't mean those are like three finalists. It just means I just haven't, heard as much. And I think Andy Kennedy, a bit of a wild card, if I'm being honest.
It sounds like, Chris, you've continued to maybe just remind us to not move on from him, regardless of how you feel about it. I know that there's been reaction all over out there from Tech fans, but I've just noticed that you've pretty consistently, it seems like since we began this conversation, reminded us to not fall asleep on Andy Kennedy possibly, and that's got to be for a reason, I guess.
Yeah, and because I think he's interested in this job, and I do think there's probably enough interest on your side of it that where you either have or will talk to him or whoever represents him. I do think that's why, and I haven't mentioned the name of Barrett Peery. I think he's involved at some level. I don't know if it's as a potential staff member or if it's a potential head coaching candidate, but I wouldn't rule that name out either just because of his ties here. And
can I ask you a question related to that, Chris? Because you just touched on it right there. I know when coaching changes happen, fans like to begin to fit their favorite pieces together that maybe previously have no connection whatsoever. And you're like, well, just keep this guy and this guy we like, and the new guy, I love them too. And we'll bring back this guy we liked for a new head coach, possibly. It's more the assistant thing I'm interested in here in my question with Barrett Peery. Is that a real thing? Does that actually have some legs, that there's like a possibility that he could serve as an assistant in that capacity for a different head coach? Is he kind of head coach or bust category? Because I know there's attraction for him to Texas Tech, but I just wonder, is it HC or nothing? Or do you think there's some reality to maybe a chance of him being a piece of another head coach's puzzle? But first, today's episode brought to you by Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket has arrived. I know you got your favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite and maybe be a winner in the process. I'm voting for that churro, baby. Team Churro 2023. Let me know where you're at BuiltMarchMadness.com. Com. When you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you're going to be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And not only that, but one Locked On fan is going to get a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your doorstep. You can't beat that. You got to try Built right now. If you haven't before, Built is the best protein bar ever. For real. So amazing. You're not even going to think they're good for you. What makes Built bars and puffs so good? For starters, all high in protein, low in sugar, covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right. Real chocolate. So run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff, churro like me, or go your own way and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March. So hop in and support your pick at BuiltMarchMadness.com. With Barrett Peery, is that a real thing? Does that actually have some legs, that there's like a possibility that he could serve as an assistant in that capacity for a different head coach? Is he kind of head coach or bust category? Because I know there's attraction for him to Texas Tech, but I just wonder, is it HC or nothing? Or do you think there's some reality to maybe a chance of him being a piece of another head coach's puzzle?
Well, and let's answer it this way. Anybody that we have sat here and talked about as a head coaching candidate, and I wouldn't rule Barrett out as that at all. I would say he's in the mix there at some level. But he's also somebody that could fit in because, and again, the main thing, if I'm on this committee, and again, they may have a whole completely different set of criteria or something they're looking for, or there's something that they're trying to weigh heavily more than the other. But my main thing would be, how can we get players here, and then who can coach them? Because this is a big boy league. We know this. This league is actually getting harder, not easier, with the influx of new teams. I mean, go look at University of Houston. I think if you're talking about adding Gonzaga to this league, my point is that this is going to be a very difficult basketball league going forward, even when Texas and Oklahoma depart. My point is that you've got to have some level of knowledge of this league or this state or this place and being able to recruit to it. And I can't pretend to know what any of these guys are saying about who they could bring with them from a staff standpoint. I think that a lot of people have connected the dots on Coach Peery because, one, he had the most to do with recruiting the freshman class. I think that was Pop, that was Lamar Washington, that was Robert Jennings. I think he's the one that I think it was heavily involved in Bacho coming here. I think there's a lot of ties to a lot of the guys that were on the team this past year. And so I think what people have maybe even correctly connected the dots is that if you're one of these guys and you can have somebody like this or Al Pinkins or both next to you, then I think that goes a long way in your candidacy. That it would, to me at least. But there's probably other names out there, assistant coaching wise, that we don't know who they are, that some of these individuals may be talking about or would bring with them. But that's a big component to you selling yourself and why you would be really good at this job is who you would surround yourself with. Because look, I think Chris Beard was a phenomenal coach. And I think one of the best things that he did was he surrounded himself with really, really good people. And when I started being around Chris Ogden and Al Pinkins and Brian Berg and some of the guys that were around whenever you were hitting high notes, and Mark Adams too, whenever he was the defensive coordinator or whatever, you start to see this is why that's working. It's not just Beard, but it's Beard's ability to surround himself with really, really good people. The Sean Sutton component, I mean, all that stuff, it hit the right notes. And so what are those answers for a lot of these guys that we're sitting here talking about? And that's up to the committee to decide who would be able to surround themselves with key pieces. But I think it's very fair for fans or even us to suggest, hey, these are some key pieces at least I would look at. And I think that we're not playing fantasy coaching search here. We're just, I think, trying to connect dots, and you're trying to put, because I think Barrett Peery never wanted to leave here. I think that's very fair.
There were a lot apparently that didn't want Barrett Peery to leave here.
You're exactly right. And I don't think Al Pinkins wants to either. I've even heard that, I can't say that it's true or not, but I've even been told that there is something in Al Pinkins' Ole Miss contract, or will be in his contract, that if he were to be retained here, he can get out of whatever situation he is in Oxford. I can't.
Hold
Yeah,
up. Interesting.
Yeah.
I was surprised you'd even mention his name, because I thought the ship, Chris, was, as they say, sailed. That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sitting here telling you that I can confirm that. I have just been told that is a pretty strong rumor out there. But again, is that accurate? But part of me would think that would be a bit far-fetched, that a guy like Coach Beard would go for something like that. However, that would be in Al's best interest, because I could tell you for 100% fact, he does not want to move his family away from Lubbock, Texas. And I was on a conversation with somebody the other day. It's funny how you hear people dog on Lubbock, make fun of it, this and that, or like, why would they want to go live there? And you get certain coaches. I think Peery and Pinkins are two great examples of that. They never wanted to leave here. They would have stayed here for as long as people would have had them, again, if it made sense for them professionally. However, there's things that happen that are totally out of their control. And I think they may end up having to leave, or did leave, or whatever. But it just, it's just, I think those are two great examples of guys that absolutely loved everything about this place, the community, the fan base, the school, the program, all of it. It checked all the boxes. And so we'll just kind of see what happens. But that's why I bring some of that stuff up, Cowan, just because I think that those are key components to all these candidates that I think are important to note, and they're unknowns to us. We don't know. I have no idea who somebody like Randy Bennett is saying, well, I would love this job, and I would bring X, Y, and Z here with me, and we would crush it. And that's assuming that Randy Bennett has actually talked to them. I just know his name has been heavily rumored, but you get what I'm saying. And insert any name here, and I that's one of the first questions that I would be curious about, because that's what's going to largely decide whether this ship sinks or sails with whoever you hire, is who they surround themselves with, and how good of a job that the head coach can manage, and all those things.
Yes, and we got off into a little bit of a tangent on some specific guys there, assistant wise, and Pinkins is in a different category than Peery, and we don't even know what category Peery's in, and we don't know if either of those guys will ever wear a shirt with a double T on it again. But it's really interesting right now, given some of the context of some immediate return with personnel that may or may not want to be a part of programs that involve those guys, versus, well, the opposite of that. And I also think that's very dangerous, Chris, because you've certainly got to be careful with being at the mercy of the immediate return, which is still very much unknown in and of itself. When you're talking about players that were a part of a 500 basketball team, you got to be very careful about being at the mercy of that with your head coach selection, versus, say, a bigger picture. Word to Chris Walker and Keith Frazier. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples. Go ahead.
Well, Cowan, I was told this recently, and I think that your example is a great one. But I was told that, look, because everybody, you're sensing some urgency. I don't want to call it impatience, but people are very curious about this search right now, and they feel like, okay, we've been at it for a little over a week, and okay, when are we going to get some closure? And it's going to really start to freak people out when you start to see player movement going on, and if that involves some of your kids, that's going to again create a level of you just feel vulnerable. Okay, right? I think that's a great way to put it. As a Texas Tech basketball fan, you don't know who's over there minding the store. You don't know who's talking to your current players. There's just a sense of vulnerability with it. But I was told, and I think this is such a good point, by somebody that's been through this a million times, and they said, you cannot make a decision, and rush it, because even if it costs you a player or two or three, because it's just not worth it. You've got to try to find the right guy. And if it takes 48 extra hours or 72 extra hours or a full week longer than you would care for, then that's what it takes. And you have to have the stomach to deal with kind of the awkwardness of getting to the end, even if it takes you some extra days. Because let's look at it. Look, you didn't, like 2 years ago, you didn't add Bryson Williams until I think it was June. I'm not even sure if you added Kevin O'Banner. It may have been June or July. So there's really good players out there in March and in April and May and even in the summer, in those summer months. So you just have to be really careful about, and I know some of your current guys are probably what you're most concerned about, but you just can't rush into anything for fear that you may lose one or three of them or whatever, or maybe even more. You have to find the right guy, whoever that is, and feel very comfortable about it. And even if it costs you a player or three, like I said. So, so I think that, because nothing against Chris Walker, but I mean, we were so bad back then. Texas Tech basketball was just a joke back then. And you're like, holy cow, this kid is a really good recruit. Let's drop everything we're doing and let's hire this guy because he can get this player. And I don't know if that would have been the best move at the time. And it wasn't the move that was made. And Keith Frazier ended up being at SMU and a couple of different places. And he wasn't the next NBA guy. So that's a great example that you bring up.
Well, it's almost a laughably extreme example of what we're alluding to here. But that's why I use it, because there's some humor to it and how poorly it went on the other side for Frazier as a college basketball player. And it wasn't really anything against Walker, but yeah, it's just it's not something you want to do, or I should say it's something you've got to obviously weigh in a very judicious kind of approach, because you've got a precious opportunity here, and I don't care who says what about the job, but we know firsthand the job can yield great success if you've got the right approach and you've got the right attitude. And I think those coaches are out there. And oh, by the way, what you're taking over is one that is as well resourced as it's ever been in the history of its existence. So I'm certainly feeling like, Chris, you've got a reason to be patient, and you've got a reason, again, to be very methodical in sorting this out. So not suggesting in any way that you're late to the punch, or, the time is running out or anything like that. We all want to see resolution. So I, like a lot of other Red Raider fans, I would guess, impatient just for that resolution. But I think you have to understand also why you want to make very, very good use of your time here, because of the opportunity that you do have when it comes to what your basketball program can provide to a head coach or to anybody interested in success in college basketball. Before we get out of here, Chris, because that was a whole lot to process there, I'm going to need some time. So let's get out of here. But before we get out of here, can I ask you this question, traveling back to Oxford, Mississippi? Because I've heard a few things in the winds along the lines of Chris Beard. Were there any legs to the possibility of Chris Beard returning to Lubbock, Texas? But first, today's episode brought to you by America's #1 sports book, FanDuel. And now is the perfect time to download the FanDuel app. Become a new customer, because new customers get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't hit. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line, point scores, 3 points drained if basketball is your thing, or all points in between. Underwater basket weaving, anyone. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with that same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Along the lines of Chris Beard, were there any legs to the possibility of Chris Beard returning to Lubbock, Texas?
I think anybody that were to suggest to you that he didn't want this opportunity when it became available has zero idea what they're talking about. He was very interested in it. I just think that there was, and he also, I believe, understood that there was some just too much to work through, whether it was off the court, the issues that he's been dealing with legally, or whether it was just the ill will,
Feelings.
the feelings, whatever. But I mean, I would tell you that, if we were sitting here talking about him as your next head coach, I mean, the last thing what I would have been worried about was if you were going to win or lose or not. And I know you're sitting here trying to find out, who can bring in here, that who you can win with. Well, if you'd have brought him in here, you would have won. But it's complicated with him, for all the other stuff. And I hate that. And I certainly understand Tech's stance there. I think that was probably the smart thing to do. But if you're saying who would have been the best fit here and who would have won, I mean, geez, man, that's a no-brainer. I mean, he
did it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. And I think,
Chris, even beyond the page 6 stuff of what he's got going on personally, the mere thought of a return after an exit from Lubbock to Austin is really hard to conceive of. But I was interested to ask you that question because I thought I was hearing some things that were based in reality, and I was a little taken aback by that because I probably would have told you no how, no way because of that ill will. And obviously it didn't happen. So it was essentially no how, no way, but it seemed like maybe there was a little bit more openness to it on a couple of fronts than I anticipated.
Yeah. I'm sure it probably took him a lot to like go, hey man, I'd love to come back. I mean, just because of how it left and people's feelings here. And he knows this is a good job. I just think he wanted to go back to his alma mater and, felt like, and he's never stayed any one place for very long. The longest stint he's ever had professionally was, here as an assistant coach. But really since then you kind of take something over, you fix it, turn it around, and away you go to the next thing. And, and I would never rule that out in the future. But yeah, that's all I can tell you. But there's going to be a lot of familiarity on that staff in Oxford. There's going to be a lot of people on that sideline that I think a lot of people recognize. Whether Al Pinkins is or is not a part of that, as we talked about earlier, I don't know for sure. But Brian Berg has already been hired. I have a healthy respect for Coach Berg. And there'll be other familiar faces that are rumored to join them too, that if you pay close attention to your programs, whether it's graduate assistants or strength coaches or whatever, that could be involved at some level too down the line. But that's still in its infancy. But yeah, I think you bring up an interesting point, and hopefully I addressed it correctly.
Yeah, man, I appreciate the perspective there, and a lot to process within that answer as well. A whole lot to take in as we're continuing to bide our time until some resolution. And as far as familiar names that could be there in Oxford, Chris Beard, if you touch Rick Gilbert, if you even look in his direction. All right, plenty to process, so let's get out of here. Chris, thanks for dealing with me on the fly as we are on the road again. And we're back with you in the same cut. Coming up on the other side, stand by because the situation remains fluid. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't so far so you miss nothing. We are going to set our sights, however, presuming something doesn't change significantly between then and now, on spring football coming up on the next edition. So join us then. Hope you will on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. Chris, thanks for the time, man.
Absolutely. Keep hope alive, people. We'll talk to you down the road.
You got it. And after making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen, make Locked On College Basketball your second listen. Brand new Locked On Network podcast. Experts Isaac Shea and Andy Patton are bringing you everything you need to know on and off the court. Plus, you're going to hear from coaches, players throughout the nation. It's Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts for your second listen, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. For Chris, I'm Casey. We'll see you for the next one on Locked On Texas Tech.